Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 155 of the Citrix Session. I'm your host, Andy Whiteside. I'm excited to be here today. I'm going to kick it off with the XenTegra commercial real quick. Guys, if you're out there and you're using Citrix technologies, NetScaler technologies, the two together, which would be phenomenal. If you're using other products that relate to Citrix, in this case, IGEL, which we're going to talk about here in a few minutes. If you need a partner, and you do, if you need somebody just to bounce ideas off, Philip Sellers is running our digital workspace practice, and Philip told me the other day that he was with a customer that just, randomly wanted to talk about something, and Philip helped him, and he's like, "Well, I can't buy that from you." And Philip's like, "I don't care." If you need a partner, and you do, you want somebody to talk to add value, let us know. I mean, we know there are people out there that are succeeding with the technologies, but they're also coming up short. Those same people. I had a meeting with a customer 2 weeks ago, and he told me about this new design he's coming out with for his Citrix environment, and I'm sitting there in front of his boss, and I'm going, "Yeah, that sounds great." But what I really want to say, and I had a conversation with his boss later, is if you design that, nobody in the organization is going to be able to support that but you. I hope you never plan on going on vacation. He was going to build quite the environment. I won't go into more detail now. So I've got with me Bill Sutton. Bill runs our delivery practice. Bill, how's it going?
Going well, Andy.
Philip, I referenced you a minute ago. Philip runs our what I call modern workspace practice, which is where Citrix and end-user compute falls in. Philip, how's it going?
Good.
You excited as always, I'm sure. Todd Smith. Todd runs the Canadian ATSM. Todd, give me the title.
So I'm a senior principal account technology strategist, which means I'm basically an ATS, covering three large healthcare organizations in Western Canada, as well as the Canadian federal government.
Okay. So you have a fairly large customers that you support. Yeah. How's that going?
It's going well. It's going really well. The messaging is on point with in terms of our healthcare messaging, especially around things like Epic and Cerner, as well as being able to support the legacy applications that are out there in healthcare. Didn't think I'd see a XenApp 6.5 environment still in production, but we do have a customer that's got one. But it's interesting, and then also the way the Canadian federal government work, or the Canadian government agencies work compared to the U.S. government agencies, is that there's some uniqueness, but then there's also a lot of commonality. So it really helps an awful lot to have that perspective going.
It's funny. I was listening to last week's podcast, and we actually brought up the fact that Bill's still seeing a bunch of see some 6.5 and 5.15 environments. 5.15.
7.15
environments. And every time I hear somebody say that, and you just said it, I'm like, no, you can't. And then people say, "Oh, yes, I do." And even in the podcast the other day, I said that to myself. I was like, "No, you don't." And then we justified, "Well, I guess you do." It's amazing what's still out there. That would be a good sign of an organization that doesn't have a good partner, because if they had a good partner, the partner would have done everything humanly possible to prevent that from happening.
Yeah. And honestly, Andy, I think there's a big challenge out there in the fact that there's a lot of applications that are currently used in production environments that haven't been certified for Server 22, or there's something that's holding the application back. And the reason why a lot of organizations haven't upgraded is because they're fearful of what's going to happen if they do go through that upgrade. And change is not always easy to do. But then you got to look at the rationalization behind why they're using that application. Well, if you're keeping an application alive because 3 people need to use it, it may be worthwhile saying, is that the right application?
Right. And that's all the more reason why you need a partner, not only just to help you with Citrix, but a partner with rationale to go, why are you even messing with that app? How can we mothball that app, or just set it aside where the impact is so minimal, as minimal as possible.
Yeah.
So guys, we have the blog that we're going to cover today is Maximize Your Endpoint DR and Eliminate Ransomware with IGEL and Citrix. You guys hear us talk about this all the time, but with HIMSS coming up, and IGEL being such a major player in the healthcare organizations, and of course Citrix, and some of those applications, McKesson, Cerner, Epic, Allscripts, which I think has a new name now, Limitless. People ask me all the time, why are you guys so active in healthcare? I'm like, well, you don't have a choice, because the things we do align with healthcare so well, it just kind of happens. Todd, you're probably perfect person to carry most of these conversations, but I'll expect Bill and Philip to chime in. Todd, why do you think this is an important blog to cover?
So there's a couple of things, right? And probably the first thing is that you can lock down the application and the data as much as possible, but you really need to consider, how do I protect that endpoint? And the easiest way to protect that endpoint is to simplify the management of it and lock it down inherently so it doesn't run a native operating system that has local admin rights and has all of the potential threat vectors that are out there, right? So if you can protect the endpoint and use that as the entryway into your environment, it's going to make your life a lot easier. So it's going to make your environment as a whole much more secure.
Yeah. And Todd, I'm a huge Windows fan, Microsoft Windows, whether it's the endpoint or the server. And my career started around that and maintains around that to this day. I think what you just said is you got to rethink whether you even have Windows on the endpoint. Is that part of that message?
Yes, and the thing is that it makes it so much easier for us to deliver a Windows-based application. I mean, this is what Citrix has been doing almost since our inception, delivering a Windows-based application to a non-Windows-based endpoint. And that's exactly what IGEL is doing. And this blog post actually highlights this in the fact that you're running a hardened operating system on the endpoint. And with IGEL, it's a Linux-based lockdown. You have a protected entry point into your protected Windows-based application that's running on a server inside your data center that's got all those inherent protections. And then you layer policies on top of that to prevent things like data exfiltration or restricting the ability to do things like copy and paste or print down to a local device. All of those things cover into our benefits of that starting point of locking down that endpoint.
Yeah. Philip, what are you seeing healthcare customers do on the endpoint?
Yeah, I mean, for healthcare customers, they're chasing that really great user experience of tap and go, right? And they want to be able to empower their clinical staff to be able to be as productive as possible. And that's a big part of this play as well. They get that experience with an IGEL on the endpoint with VDI for the workload. And they're also intrinsically getting security as part of that. So they're hitting it across several different metrics: great user experience, fast productivity, and a secure endpoint. So the healthcare customers we're looking at and working with, we really advocate for this because it is a triple threat. It's a triple play for them to get great outcomes at the end of the day. But the security thing can't be understated. It is tough when you have data leaving your premises on a device. You don't have as much control. So this is a great play to reestablish that control and keep it in the confines of your data center.
Bill, any active or current projects or past projects where you've seen them actually execute on this and any of the benefits that came from it?
Absolutely. We've got one going right now where we're a healthcare organization where we're implementing or helping them migrate their IGEL environment and expand it to some new facilities. And, certainly everything that Todd and Philip said applies to this. The key thing here that Philip said that I was going to bring up is the whole concept of tap and go and the ability to save the clinician the time that it takes to log into an existing endpoint and all the management that goes around that. If you save a clinician 10 seconds during the day and multiply that by the number of clinicians and the number of days, that's real time that they can spend with patients and not tangling with technology. So the simpler and more secure and more performant you make it, the better. And IGEL goes a long way towards that.
I'm going to call out the Black Cat was a skilled exfiltration, threatened to leak photos of sensitive data for plastic surgery patients.
Yep.
Imagine the negative that would happen for an organization if that happened to their customers. We'll walk through the article here. That was pretty much, that was the intro. And I think we covered a lot of things. The endpoint as the first line of threat defense. Todd, I think we've covered this to some degree, but you can never cover it enough. I use the "it ain't Windows" messaging. Let me say one thing real quick. I asked Bill, do you have an example? And I honestly had no idea whether he had an example or not. But because of the way we partner with our customers, I knew we probably did. Because this isn't something we just talk about, in marketing, things like this. These are things we do every day with our customers. These are like conversations that are top of mind daily. Endpoint is first line defense. Yes. Obviously, that's one of the conversations we are having daily. Todd, how does Citrix see the endpoint as part of the story? Clearly, you guys don't sell endpoints. In fact, have you ever sold endpoints? You've been around a long time with me, but even longer. Has there ever been a Citrix endpoint?
So no, there hasn't been a Citrix built endpoint. I mean, we've done things where we've added our software baked into some of the endpoints, whether it be IGELs or other platforms. You could actually order them from the manufacturer with the Citrix receiver or Citrix client pre-installed. But we've always kind of stayed out of the hardware business when it comes to that. But it's an interesting conversation, the fact that basically you spin up you take your endpoint out of the box, you plug it in. If it already has the Citrix receiver or Citrix Workspace app already installed on it, you basically point it to your domain, or put in your email address, and it will find access to your storefront and properly get it configured for you. So it really is more of a zero trust or zero touch approach for this. The benefit there is that, once again, going back to that user experience, you want your doctors to practice medicine, not be IT professionals. And if I can deliver an endpoint that already has something configured on it, and all they have to do is plug the blue wire into the blue socket and the red wire into the red one and plug in the power, guess what? That job is very easy, and it doesn't take a lot of specialized skills or training to be able to do that. And now all of a sudden you're up on the network. The endpoint really has come down to, it really is living up to the old plug and play adage.
Yeah. Well, I think I just fell for the same trap most of our customers fall for. We think if endpoint equals hardware, really it's all about enabling the endpoint.
Sure.
Philip, any thoughts on how the Citrix method of enabling the endpoint through the Workspace app, which by the way includes the enterprise browser? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it is really easy. And I think that's the crux of it, right? You don't need specialists at the endpoint. And, we also are seeing our healthcare customers scale, increasing size, increasingly more employees, more endpoints. And so it's a very consistent way. When you're using the Citrix Workspace app, it is a known way. You're not retraining your staff. And so it turns into a very, very user-friendly, approachable way of interacting with your technology. And again, to Todd's point, you want your doctors doctoring. I don't know if that's actually a verb, but we'll use it as one today. You want them doing their job, not being an IT troubleshooter.
Yeah. Yeah, I do want to go to Bill and ask a question about this, but before I go there, there's one paragraph here, Todd, that talks about cloud-based workloads. Back in the day, let's say 5, 10, 15 years ago, when all this was like client server, data center centric, enabling the endpoint was doable, not as easy. Now with cloud delivered workloads, like for example, IGEL's ability to do onboarding, Citrix's ability to do onboarding with just nothing but an email address. This challenge has become super solvable and kind of native, right?
Yeah, and especially where this is a great use case that we're seeing a lot more happening in around things like practitioners that are not assigned and working in a hospital every day, and it typically tends to be your ancillary clinicians, right? The folks that are doing plastic surgery, the folks that are the ophthalmologists and the dentists that are working outside of a typical hospital. They're typically going with their own solution. That could be a cloud-hosted virtual app or virtual desktop. Well, what if I can log into my my EMR or connect into the hospital that's containing the patient records without having to go and get a network connection to that hospital or a network, to go through any other special device or specialized hardware to be able to do that. What if I could access it directly from a cloud hosted virtual desktop that's out there? And that also works on, if I switch devices as well, right? Because it is accessible via the cloud, that means it's accessible anywhere. But I still want to make sure that I have those same protections and the same access controls and the same policies that can be delivered, regardless of whether I'm in a traditional on-prem in the hospital environment or whether I'm connecting in remotely from whatever device that's out there.
Yeah, a little bit of software, smart software, the appropriate software, and an IP address, and you could securely make all this stuff work.
Yep,
a long way. Bill, my question for you is going to be: I met with one of our colleagues this morning, and they talked about one of our larger clients that went non-Windows. They did not go IGEL, and they got boxed in based on functionality. Do you think there's customers out there that have tried this? We'll call it the thin clients approach one time, and they'll never go back to it, and they're not taking the advantages of what IGEL can do.
Yeah, I think there's a number of those that have tried it and failed, and part of that is an issue with execution. Part of it's poor planning. Part of it's the expectation gap between what the technology can deliver and what the customer thinks it can deliver. That's probably the biggest element. The other thing is a lot of the other players. It's either a hardware play along with the software, or it's just an endpoint, an actual device, a device that you've got to buy and put somewhere and plug in and connect. IGEL, of course, as we know, is a software company now, and they don't sell thin clients anymore. They partner with major hardware providers, and you can install the IGEL OS on pretty much just about anything, any reasonably recent device. I know back in the day, those of you who have been around Andy Whiteside, he used to carry a lot of old PCs in the trunk of his car, and he'd put IGEL OS on them or do some other fancy stuff with them to show you how you could reuse them. And IGEL can still do that. But the other thing about IGEL is the ability to do it on a USB stick or oh shoot, Andy, what's it called? I should know it. It escaped.
UD Pocket?
UD Pocket. Yeah, the ability to plug the UD Pocket USB device into any laptop or desktop and immediately get policies pushed down to it, and it acts just like, or becomes, as it were, a thin client device, and that gives users the ability to have the same experience pretty much no matter where they are, as long as they can boot off that USB device.
That and even what I love, which never has really taken off, the idea you load IGEL on a HDMI stick, which so far has proven to be underpowered. I think a day is going to come back around where that's a viable solution as well. All right, Todd.
I think one thing to add to Bill's comment, and this is taking the time to plan out your implementation. Knowing what the requirements are of the applications and also the peripherals, the devices that you're going to be plugging in, and also knowing the capabilities of whatever endpoint you're using. So if it's a Linux-based endpoint and you're plugging a device that only has Windows device drivers, you need to make sure that you've tested that properly, right? So I had a hospital in Connecticut one time that their front desk at the registration desk was also their checkout, and it was also, they did some scanning of the patient's information, right? So they had a webcam to take a photo. They had a signature pad to capture the people's signature for when they're signing off on all the documents. They also had a credit card reader on it, as well as a label printer and a full-size printer attached to it. If you plug that into a Linux device, or a Linux endpoint, there's chances that one of those, or maybe multiple of those devices, may not properly sync all the way through into that session. So once again, thinking about it, and maybe having that use case, maybe that stays as a Windows endpoint. The rest of them could be, a true thin client. It just comes down to making sure you plan properly.
That again goes to where, that real partner gets into play and says, look, I know you can do this with these four things, but this fifth one, yeah, we need to use Windows on the endpoint. Or it might be, and that's what's so nice about today's world, we can do all of them with a really smart Linux endpoint, especially one that's been tailored to work with all these solutions. And that's where IGEL is by far the cut above everybody else.
Yep.
Todd, let's talk disaster recovery as part of security, which it is. And making sure people are prepared. How does using IGEL versus Windows enable disaster recovery options?
So it opens up a lot of possibilities, right? So the fact that IGEL is a software-based solution that you can take, a bunch of older PCs, you just back up your car to the location, take out whatever devices are in the back of in your trunk. You could pretty much set up a hospital or set up a recovery center, disaster recovery center, based on hardware that was available. As long as you've got that, as long as it can run the IGEL components on it, that adds to a lot of potential recovery options from a disaster recovery perspective. It is also a situation where you have secure connections from anywhere, right? You also have the ability to recover faster without making that incredibly expensive DR site that always has to be maintained. It has to be, tested. It has to be always available. It's the world's biggest insurance policy that you're probably never going to have to use until you actually need it. And we've seen situations where, especially over the past 3 to 4 years, of situations where they've taken over convention centers and turned them into hospitals, or at least treatment facilities. That could be, that's a lot harder to do when you don't have a strategy around how to get the endpoints there and how to maintain those and how to get those up and running very quickly. Because most of the IT folks are going to be worried about getting access, getting the data synced, getting the protection up and running. The last thing on their mind is typically going to be getting the endpoint stood up. If you can make that a very simple process that anyone can do it, guess what? Your recovery is going to go much faster.
And Philip, one of the ones they call out here is just the fact that, recovery might just be rebooting.
Yeah, I think that's an amazing point, right? So using Citrix technology at the core here, all you have to do is set it to reset the environment every time a user logs out, right? And so from a disaster recovery standpoint, it is as easy as a reboot, but that goes a step further too. It's also about being able to trust that golden master. It's not infected. We can have certainty and know for sure that it is not affected by the cyber attack and that you're in good shape. And so we had a recent incident with a customer where they were able to get back up because of that technology. They knew that they could have confidence in the Citrix environment running the IGEL thin clients because it couldn't possibly be affected, or it would be extremely hard and very remote possibility of it being infected. So it's also that insurance policy from that layer.
Well, just to split hairs with you on something you said, yes, you got the back-end Citrix environment or whatever you see the presentation model is, but on the IGEL side, it's not a set it, right? You would have to do unnatural things when you build in order for it to become where data could be resonant.
Yeah, I mean, it's hardened. And I think that's the other part of it is that it was designed with security in mind for the express purpose of being a read-only, non-data resident endpoint operating system. Yeah. Almost everything else you encounter in the wild, it's going to have data on it. And IGEL set out to make it the opposite of that.
So Bill, same thing. I haven't pre-staged this question for you, but do you have an example of a customer who understands this and are taking advantage of the DR aspects of a non-Windows, in this case, IGEL endpoint solution?
Absolutely. Yeah. Leveraging the non-Windows on the endpoint at a DR facility, the ability to quickly update it if, as the firmware changes, to quickly repurpose the device or reset the device based on the most current release. I go back when I read this, I think about it was probably 10 years ago, and it wasn't healthcare, it was financial services. They actually were required after 9/11, financial services organizations were required to do a DR test every quarter and a live test every 6 months. I think it was every other quarter. And that live test meant they actually had to have a facility in another zip code, not in a floodplain, where they had essentially their operations set up. And this financial services organization had a bunch of Windows machines sitting on these repurposed desktops in this facility across town, where they would had everybody go on a Saturday morning and they cut the connection. And I thought to myself, wow, imagine the update process you have to go through every 3 months to bring those current and make sure everything's the same as it is in the office. And certainly with IGEL, if they had IGEL back then, that would have made their lives a whole lot easier and simpler, and the users would have had a much better experience.
And I'll use this comment to tie it into the last paragraph here, which talks about the last section. Remember the endpoint. So I'll throw this out to all three of you guys. I believe that this should not be something you do at the time of a security incident or the time that you have a DR incident. If you just do it this way every day, it becomes natural, and it's not a change when something happens. It's how you work. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the critical thing there, Andy, is that it's a behavior change, but it's a behavior change on both the user as well as the IT administrator perspective, right? Users need to be comfortable with resetting or rebooting that device as they're walking away from it, right? Making sure they log out. Just don't leave an open session sitting there. IGEL's got some really great management capabilities that will help do that for the user. But at the same time, the IT administrators need to be aware that this is a capability that they should be enabling out of the box, right? It doesn't require you to wait until you do a hardware refresh, or it doesn't require you to wait until you do some type of application upgrade. This is something you can do now that's going to immediately have an impact on your overall protection scheme.
Philip, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, as much as it's a great insurance policy, there are benefits on a day-to-day basis. Operationally, this scales. As healthcare organizations are looking and getting larger, we see the mergers, we see the trends of things consolidating in healthcare. It is a great way of optimizing and reducing their costs and their organizational operation spend. That's not always a cost that can be easily justified, but when you're adding headcount to directly reflect, the number of users you're supporting, this is a great way of combating that as well. So there's operational benefits as well as the long-term insurance policy and security benefits.
So Bill, I'll bring this question to you. Philip mentioned cost. I mean, first of all, the cost of not doing this is very high, but a lot of people look at this as an expense to move in this direction. Bill, how many of the customers you've interacted with do you think actually understand the total cost of running Windows-based endpoints today?
Not as many as we'd like, to be honest. And you're right. They look at this as an added cost without necessarily considering the overall benefit to the organization, both from a security perspective, from a device management perspective, and frankly, also from an end user perspective. What is the experience of the end user, and making that experience consistent across all environments, whether it's, in the office, at home, at a DR facility, what have you, I think is really critical here as well. And IGEL certainly enables that.
Yeah, going back to the partner aspect, we're starting to offer our customers a free assessment on the cost of their endpoints today, where they stand today, because how do you guide them around security and cost if you don't know where you're starting from? So from a security perspective, if you're running Windows, it can't be secure. It just can't be. It's too powerful, too many things you can do with it. Every attack vector on the planet targets that first. And then how do you understand how much it costs and how much more it's going to cost or how much less it's going to cost if you don't know where you're starting from?
Absolutely.
So guys, I think if you want to learn more, go by the HIMSS booth. If you're a healthcare customer, if you're going to be at HIMSS, XenTegra will have a booth there. We're having a happy hour. Reach out to us about that. Guys, I appreciate the time today, and always good catching up with you guys around how Citrix is a security play and a security enabler. And to be honest, from the first time I ever saw it, I didn't think of it that way, but it didn't take long to figure out, hey, this is more secure. Todd, thank you for your time. Philip, Bill as well.
Thanks.
No problem.
Thank you.